All right, out here with Bill Neumann. We just finished a session at the Tinterdome. How's it going, Bill?
Good. Glad to finally be with you, E.
Yeah, so I grew up idolising you. Your competition runs were amazing back in the day. Tell me how you started riding.
How I started riding? I mean, I guess I was always on bikes from the beginning, you know, racing BMX a little bit and stuff. But it was always more about doing tricks on bikes, and at some time I just realized that, and I took time off bikes for a little while, and then got back into it at some point when I saw my first freestyling magazine with Ron Wilkerson on the cover. I said that's what I like about bikes, about BMX, is that right there.
So when did you start competing?
I mean, I guess it was within months of riding. I started riding in 1986 and entered my first competition that same year, I guess the summer of '86, probably within 6 months of starting to ride.
And what kind of bike did you start out riding?
So I used to race on a GT Mach 1 back in the day. I guess it was an '85 GT Mach 1. And a buddy of mine back in Michigan and I converted our GT BMX racing bikes into essentially freestyle bikes, put brakes on them, pegs, and built them up like that. I guess I rode that bike for a solid 2 or 3 months until Christmas came around, and then I got my first Haro Sport. '86 Haro Sport was my first legit freestyle bicycle.
When did you sort of think to yourself, you know, this is what I love to do, this is what I'm going to do for the majority of your life?
I mean, I think it was almost immediately, because I knew I liked bikes already, so there was definitely that. But then shortly after starting, I guess it was also within 6 months, I took a trip down to South Florida with my family and a friend of mine, and we saw a GT BMX show with Martin Appareo, Brian Skura, and Josh White. And that was also within a week of the movie Rad coming out. We saw that movie Rad, and then we saw a second show there in Florida, and after that it was over. We were hooked on our bikes every day, all day.
That's
from that
awesome.
point forward, yeah. So Martin was the first pro I saw, and definitely looked up to him for a while there until I saw Dennis McCoy. And then I still loved Martin, of course, but then it was all about Dennis McCoy at that point, from '86 through, whatever, '88, '89, still until today, really.
So when did you start competing in the AFA contest? That's when I really kind of heard of you in the magazines and stuff.
Yeah, I guess the first AFA competition would have been 1986 as well, but that was like a novice or intermediate class. They had that at that time. By the next year, they had only expert class by that time. So '87 would have been the first time I was in an expert class, and that was Columbus, Ohio, '86, '87.
So, I mean, I've always looked up to how smooth you are with riding, and like we talked about off camera, that takes a lot of time to build that craft. What kind of practice did you do for the competitions back in the day?
Yeah, we talked about this briefly earlier. I guess it was just, it's that obsessive compulsive nature that I have of just doing stuff over and over and over again, not only until I can hit something, but until I can do it, 10, 15 times in a row, do it over and over without any bobbles, and I just obsessed about that stuff, I guess. It's just my nature, I suppose.
Are you still like that now?
Yeah, I try to be. In some ways, maybe even more so, because I see my riding now on film more than I used to back in the day, and if I see something I don't like, I really obsess and try and straighten it out. I'm not happy with just pulling a trick, like with getting the job done. I want it to be perfect, really.
Tell me about when you competed in the AFAs against Dennis McCoy and Kevin Jones, and you were one of the first guys to do the hitchhiker.
Yeah, I guess so. That would have been 1989. I decided after the last competition in '88. Actually, I believe it was Todd Carter. We were looking at the kind of the results from the competition, and I think it might have been Todd Carter joked and said, "Hey, you have enough points, you could turn pro at the end of the year." And we both sort of just laughed about that, because at that time you had to actually qualify at a certain place throughout the year, go to the contest, qualify to turn pro. You couldn't just make up your mind to turn pro. And I guess we both sort of laughed at that. And then I remember thinking on the airplane on the way home, well, I'm getting ready to be, I guess I was in my junior year in high school, getting ready to be a senior or whatever it was, and I knew I didn't want to work a regular job at the time for sure. I wanted to make this bike thing work, and it seemed like a pretty good time to go pro. I might not have been exactly ready at that moment, but I knew I was getting ready to put in the work at that point. So getting back from that contest, I started riding my ass off from that point forward, and I guess I sort of just decided that, yeah, I was going to do that. I might have even kept it quiet for a little while until maybe the beginning of the year, and then I told people, yeah, I'm going to do that. And it was sort of unheard of at that time for the experts. I mean, if Kevin Jones, I think, had gone pro, nobody's questioning that at the time, but it was sort of like
a big deal.
Yeah, well, people, nobody wanted to step on those first generation pros, step on their toes, I think. It would have been okay if Kevin had done it, but for me to do it was a little different. So we were the first two to like break through there and be the second wave of riders at that competition. So that was myself, Kevin, Dennis. I never rode against any of those other riders like Woody, Martin, and that. That was sort of it for those guys once that second wave hit.
So when did the hitchhiker come about?
That was that competition right there. That was, I guess Kevin was doing them in '88 and kept it under wraps for a little while. The first I heard about it, it's a fairly long story. I don't know if we can get into the long version of that story right here, but Chase sort of was riding with Kevin at the time and kind of leaked that trick. People knew there was a trick called a hitchhiker, but no one really knew what it was. Chase told another buddy of mine, Emil, about that trick. Emil told me, and I immediately thought, well, I have to learn this trick. I was 16 years old at the time. Looking back at it, I probably should have waited and let Kevin debut that trick before I started messing with it, but I was 16 years old and all I wanted to do was learn every trick there was out there. So I set my eyes on that, started working on it, started fooling around with it the same night I heard. Didn't stop working on it until I had it, which was, I guess, about 2 days later. I had that trick, was starting to pull it within 2 days. So when Kevin first debuted at that trick at that Pennsylvania contest, I was also doing it there at that contest.
That's amazing. Tell me about the Riders brand that you do.
Yeah, that was just
I remember seeing it in a magazine back in the day, but tell me how that started. And
yeah,
it's still going to this day. It's pretty rad.
Yeah, well, it's not like it's still going. It just came back, and it's just sort of a fun thing to do these days. But that was it was just an idea. We always, the Raiders were big. It was more of a gangster thing than it was a football thing back in the 90s, I suppose. But everyone was into the Raiders, had the Raiders caps, this, that, and then I don't know, one day we were just looking at the hat and kind of jokingly covered up the A and said, hey, check that out, Riders. And we didn't think much of it at the time, but then we thought deeper about it, started thinking about, there was not a lot of money in BMX at the time, Flatland or whatever. We started thinking, how are we going to pay our bills? We're getting ready to move out to California. We need to figure out some way to generate some money. We thought, let's make some t-shirts. And then that idea of the Riders things just sort of clicked. And then we started looking at the logo a little closer. We used a picture of Dennis McCoy, actually, out of the magazines with a full-face Moto 5 helmet, switched up the helmet, made the shirts. That was it. Story over. We thought we'd sell maybe 100 of those or so. We put a tiny little ad in the back of whatever it was at the time, Go or Freestyle magazine, with my mother's phone number, and I guess it even had her address on it at the time. And the shirts started selling like hotcakes. We didn't anticipate that we'd be sending shirts, though, to Japan and Finland and whatnot. So a lot of those shirts we were obviously not making money on, but they were getting around, so that was cool. So
what about your getting out of the sport? Explain, from my perception, you were one of the top riders. You won I always remember the Make-A-Wish contest in Virginia.
Right.
You won that contest and then you kind of disappeared.
Yeah, I was still riding.
Seemed to.
Yeah, no, yeah. I was right. So that contest would have been 1990. And that was definitely like my last legit real contest at the time. But I started doing shows for GT Bicycles in 1991 and did a whole hell of a lot of shows between 1991 and 96. So I was still on my bike, but definitely not putting in the work, not practicing, but still on my bike nearly every day. I was probably doing, between GT Bicycles and a couple other promoters, mainly one up in Toronto, Canada, probably doing 200 shows a year for 6 years or whatever. So, complete burnout at some point. Was just over it. Didn't want to see a bicycle at some point. When I set it down, I just didn't pick it up again. That was it. It was over.
Can you put anything on how you got back into riding?
Yeah, there's several factors of that, I guess. I'd been living down in Mexico on and off for the better part of 8 years, and I was so far removed from bicycles, from freestyle. I literally didn't look at anything. I wasn't looking on the internet, not seeing anything. Maybe one little thing here and there, but not keeping up with who was in the sport, not watching it, not paying attention. I didn't do a wheelie on a bicycle probably for 15 to 18 years. Didn't ride a BMX bike at all, didn't care. And then things happened. I ended up back in Michigan, family stuff or whatever. I left Mexico, ended up back in Michigan, and was just on the laptop, and I don't know, it just struck me. I wanted to see what was going on with the sport, and it was just a timing thing. I was sort of almost more interested looking at the new bikes and thinking, well, they look so much better than what we used to ride back in the day. I wish I'd been able to ride one of those bikes. And I started thinking, well, maybe it's not too late. Maybe I still can ride one of those bikes. And then the ideas kind of snowballed, I guess. And,
So have you? Which events have you been to since you've been back on your bike?
Well, I went to Real City Spin, the last one that they had, but I'd only been back on my bike for about a month at the time. But I went there just to check it out, and it was a blast. I loved it. Loved the atmosphere. Got to see a lot of those top pros there. So I did that. I've been to Toronto twice. The different AFA comps that James has done in Detroit, and then this one here, Battle in the Rockies.
So what's like your opinion of modern day Flatland?
Yeah, I love it. It's great. I love the old stuff too, though. I love the mid-school stuff as well. I'm not anti that stuff, but yeah, I love the new stuff also. Some of it I can't even almost comprehend yet, and I'm not allowing myself really to even work on that stuff yet, because I sort of I'm being hard on myself. I sort of want to have all of my old stuff back before I mess with the new stuff. But I'm getting ready to set up a brakeless bike now and start fooling around, so we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, James said you had like a rule where you have like 600 tricks or something that you need to do before you start on modern day flat. Is that true?
No, maybe not. I mean, you might have misunderstood. I was basically saying that I wanted to have a certain percentage of my tricks back before I started to mess with new stuff. I feel like maybe right now I'm somewhere, I don't know what the number of tricks is, I have no idea, but you know, I feel like I'm somewhere around 70% maybe of what I used to be, and I guess I could start fooling around with some new stuff now and continue to chip away at that last 30% at the same time. That's probably what I should be doing.
So you're a tall rider like me, 6'2". What bike setup do you have?
Yeah, I'm riding, which is another reason you're asking what made me get back into BMX. When I was looking at the modern bikes, I was looking at all these bikes that didn't have platforms, and they looked like really low standover height, and I just didn't really like the look of those bikes. And right at that same time, I saw the first advertisement for Haro bringing back that DMC, that green DMC. And at first I looked at that and I thought it was just the old bike, that they'd repopped it exactly the same. And then I realized it didn't have those stupid frame standers, and it had new geometry, and was a well-built bike. And not only that, it was a big bike. It seemed well suited for it. It seemed perfect. The timing seemed perfect when that bike came out. So I knew immediately that would be the bike I would ride. And I'm still riding that bike right now. I love it. It's great. It may be not perfect. If I was going to design my own frame, I might change some things, but that bike's very good for me.
So you came back, 2 edits in about 2 weeks?
Yeah, it was
pretty crazy. Tell me about those edits, like the work that went into those edits.
Yeah, I decided that back in the day there's just not much of my riding, and it was by design. I mean, there's not a lot of my ridings. I sort of used to hide from the cameras back in the day. I would just, unless somebody was filming one of my contest routines or showed up at one of the GT shows and filmed or whatever, I was just not big at letting people film me or filming myself. But later I sort of regretted that I didn't have much to look back at. Half the tricks I did back in the day, I'd never even seen myself do these tricks. So I thought, once I started to get the stuff back, I went out and bought a video camera, and I wasn't, also I'm not that comfortable with somebody filming me, so I also bought a robot that goes with the video camera. You wear like a little pager type thing, a little sensor, and it just kind of follows you around. So I bought all that stuff, and I knew sort of what I wanted to get on film at that point, so I worked on that stuff for maybe a month straight, knowing exactly what tricks, what combos I wanted to do, and then I probably filmed the whole thing in 3 days or whatever with that robot and that camera. And it was 3 edits. It probably took me 3 or 4 days to film all that, and then I put them out, whatever. I think it was 1 day apart, 3 in a row.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Tell me about where you're born, where you ride. You mentioned you got a bike shop close to you as well as your skate park where you ride. That's pretty important, I think.
Yeah, I grew up in Royal Oak, Michigan. I'm still there right now, not in the same house, but I'm in Royal Oak, Michigan, and I have Modern Skate Park, which is also in Royal Oak, Michigan. That's about a mile and a half south from where I am, and then I have Albie's BMX shop that's about a mile north of where I am. So I couldn't be in a better location. I have probably the best bike shop in the world, if one of the best bike shops in the world. Lifelong friends of mine that own the place treat me great, and then George at Modern also treats me great. If it wasn't for either one of those things, I might not even be in Michigan right now, especially Modern, to be honest, because if I didn't have an indoor place to ride during the winter, that would kind of be it for me. So I'd lose my mind, I guess, during the winter if I didn't have that place.
Yeah. So if you had to pick a rider that was your most influential, had the most influential effect on your riding, who would it be?
Yeah, it's probably a tie between Dennis and Kevin Jones. Kevin Jones more because of the tricks, but Dennis because of his style. Dennis was such a style cat, and his tricks as well. I wanted to be Dennis, but it was Kevin's tricks, I guess, that I was learning more, towards the late 80s, early 90s. But those two guys, others as well. Rick Molinterno was another guy.
So what was it like when you first beat Dennis McCoy. That must have been. Tell me about that.
It was a.
It seemed like a big deal in the magazine.
It was a big deal, I guess. Because, but you know, by the time that actually happened, it was. I mean, Dennis is still an idol of mine, no doubt, like to this day. But by that time, we were already like pretty good friends. You know, I mean, we talked with each other on the phone a lot before contests. A lot of times sharing hotel rooms to cut down money. So I mean, he became a friend by that time. So it wasn't the same feeling like as it would have been when I was 14 years old, for example. But yeah, no, it still felt great.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So what's your plans for the future?
Yeah, I'm going to continue riding. I guess I feel great right now. My body feels probably as good right now at my age as what it did when I was in my mid-20s. Sometimes even better, to be honest. Some days I feel older than what I am, but for the most part I feel really good. So I look at that every day and I say, you know, every day I waste or don't ride right now, I don't know how much more time I have where I'm going to feel this good and be able to do it. So I feel like I need to really take advantage of this. I plan to ride for, you know, at least another 5-6 years, maybe more. I don't know.
So for the record, how old are you?
Yeah, that's a question I hate to answer, but 46. I'm 46
Wow.
years old, yeah.
Riding so dialed again. It's so cool to see. I love it. What's your opinion about brakes and no brakes?
I don't have much of an opinion either way. I think people just do whatever they want to do, sort of thing. You know, I love brakeless riding, but I love some stuff I think looks better with brakes too. Some stuff is meant to be done brakeless. Some stuff I think is kind of meant to be done with brakes. That's the way I see it. Like, and plus, I mean, you can always take your hands off the levers. You don't necessarily have to pull the brakes all the way off the bike. But that being said, I definitely want to set up a brakeless bike to force myself to work on some of that stuff. But yeah, I like both styles of riding, equal, I guess.
All right, let's wrap this up. That was great catching up with you, Bill. Thank you.
Right on, no problem, me.